Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 2, Stormborn. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 7, Episode 2. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, if last week's episode was a typical episode 1, this is a typical episode 2, which is further setting up the storyline, but delves a bit deeper into setting the stage for the season. And like last week's episode, this episode does an excellent job at doing it. So it was a pretty exciting episode, and every scene serves a purpose and was well executed. So another necessary episode for the season. However, we've been told multiple times that the pacing of the season would be much faster than previous seasons, and I think we have yet to really see that, but perhaps we will soon. So the episode begins with Daenerys in Dragonstone preparing for her conquest of Westeros, and we start with a scene I never actually expected to get, and that's with Daenerys grilling Varys about his past loyalties. When Varys appears alongside Daenerys at the end of Season 6, many questioned why she'd be willing to work with him. After all, she banished Jorah for sending letters to Varys, which led to an assassination attempt on her life, which was perpetrated by Varys. So here those questions were put to rest, where Daenerys grills Varys about his past misdeeds and his drifting loyalties. Of course, it is a bit odd that she waited until they got all the way from Meereen to Dragonstone to confront him, but whatever. I really liked how she quoted Ilario Mupatis from the first season, talking about people who would say that the common folk cry out for their true queen and drink secret toasts to her health, which is pretty much exactly what he said to Viserys. Of course, he said king. But here she says that her brother was stupid enough to believe them, which means Daenerys is much smarter now and knows that the political situation is much more complicated than that, and also warning Varys not to spout out that same bullshit to her, but I don't think he would. And it's also interesting he specifically questioned she specifically questioned Varys about the assassination attempt by the wine merchant that intended to poison her, as that is something many fans have been questioning ever since it was revealed that Varys is now devoted to Daenerys. But I don't think they significantly satisfied those concerns in this conversation, because it didn't exactly answer why Varys would send the assassin to kill Daenerys. The only explanation they gave is that Varys had to follow Robert's orders in order to protect his own life and position. However, Varys is a smart man. He would have been able to make it look like he was sending someone to kill Daenerys without actually doing it. And the only reason the assassination attempt didn't succeed was because of Jorah, and he switched loyalties and stopped it, something that Varys couldn't possibly know was going to happen. But the other explanation is hinted at in the scene is that at this stage Varys wasn't fully devoted to Daenerys, and that wouldn't come until later when he learned exactly what kind of ruler she was. Either way, I did like Varys' response to her challenges, is that he trusts his own eyes, and his first interest is always serving the needs of the people, and he won't just give out blind devotion to any leader that doesn't deserve it, which is actually really great. It's totally the correct attitude to have, which addresses the only following orders excuse. And I also like how Varys was willing to be upfront with her and just say it outright rather than trying to play her or placate her. It shows that Varys actually does believe in Daenerys and respects her, especially the way he offered his life up to her. He would never have done that for Robert or Joffrey or Tywin or Cersei, not only because he wouldn't trust them with his life, which is very wise, but because he didn't think they were wise enough to make the right decision. So I do think Daenerys gained a lot of respect for Varys in this, particularly when she threatened to burn him alive if he betrayed her, and he responded by saying that he'd expect nothing less from the mother of dragons. I think he earned a lot of respect by saying that, so I think we can put to bed this Daenerys and Varys conflict. So then Melisandre shows up and shows her respect because the Red Priestess gave, helped her bring peace to Meereen. Of course, Melisandre had nothing to do with that, but Daenerys doesn't know that. But when Varys tries to give her shit for supporting Stannis, Daenerys mentions they're forgiving people today for supporting the wrong king in the past, which is a way to shut him up, as he has to concede to her for forgiving him. But if you recall, the main reason Varys hated Stannis was because of Melisandre specifically, because he was using her dark magic, which he was strongly against. So even though Daenerys silenced him, he still can't stand her. Melisandre, however, brings up the Prince Who Was Promised prophecy, which I actually do believe this was the first time that exact phrase was used in the show, as in previous seasons they said, the one who was promised. But this episode once again clarifies something fans have been arguing over, as some suggested Daenerys may be the prince that was promised, while others question that because she isn't a prince. So Daenerys herself questioned that, and so we had Missandei clarify for her and the audience that this is actually an improper translation, that the term in High Valyrian is actually gender neutral, making the translation more accurately prince or princess. However, I don't think Melisandre was saying specifically that she and only she was the prince who was promised. She was saying prophecy is a tricky thing, something that she learned firsthand. So I think she believes that both Daenerys and Jon Snow have a role to play, which is why she suggested she meet with him. It's funny she didn't mention the fact that he was resurrected when Daenerys asked what made him so special. I thought that would be a huge selling point. Maybe she doesn't want to sound crazy. And Melisandre kind of just touched on the threat with the White Walkers, which to my knowledge is the first time Daenerys is hearing about this in any significant way, and yet she kind of just glossed over this part of it, so we don't really know her mind on it, but I suspect that she'd be really skeptical. So Tyrion, of course, disregarded the mystical side of things and focused on the fact that Jon Snow was a good man and he's now King of the North, would make a very strong potential ally. In fact, I'm surprised Tyrion didn't send out ravens to all the noble houses of Westeros demanding that they declare for Daenerys, or at least feeling them out. After all, that's what Aegon the Conqueror did when he wanted to conquer Westeros. It's kind of an oversight that Tyrion didn't think of this, but the even bigger blunder was the fact that Varys didn't even know that Jon Snow was King of the North. Man, he's really slipping in his old age. He was known as the greatest spy master who had little birds all over Westeros and Essos for that matter. Now you may say, well, he was traveling from Meereen to Westeros, perhaps he was just out of touch. Yeah, I'm not buying that for a second. They've been on Dragonstone long enough to learn most of the basic information, and I'll put it to you this way. Freaking Hot Pie knew Jon Snow was King of the North. So if freaking Hot Pie knows something that Varys doesn't, then he's really sucking at his job. I don't care what excuses anybody has. So then we see Daenerys' version of a small council meeting where she meets with her allies and advisors, which I found really interesting, as this is the first time we see Daenerys interact with Lady Olenna and Ellaria Sand, and the first time we see all of her allies together in one place. It was interesting seeing how negatively Tyrion reacted to Ellaria Sand for killing Myrcella. Many were wondering if this topic would come up. I didn't think it would, but I was wrong. However, I think this was mentioned more to remind the audience that Ellaria killed Myrcella, as I dare say this topic will become very relevant in the near future. But anyway, we learned where Daenerys isn't going to directly attack King's Landing, and Tyrion's reasoning is pretty sound, that if they go in and kill everyone with dragonfire, that would be no real way to win over the people. And I love that Daenerys echoed Tyrion's words about not wanting to be Queen of the Ashes, which is actually a nice play on the thing Varys said about Littlefinger, that he burned the country down if he could be King of the Ashes, which really sets her apart from him, which I suppose explains why Varys supports her. And even though Yara, Ellaria, and Lady Olenna objected to Tyrion's plan, they went along with it because they respect Daenerys' commands. But I think they really warmed to the plan when Tyrion mentioned the part about the Unsullied taking Castle Rock. I took particularly note of the huge smile on Laria's face. But it was really interesting getting Lady Olenna and Daenerys having a conversation, as Lady Olenna is very wise. However, I dare say she doesn't care that much about what happens to the common people, but she's a bit more realistic rather than idealistic. And it was really interesting what she said about Tyrion being a clever man and that she's outlived a lot of clever men because she didn't listen to him. Because I've been saying that for a while now, Daenerys was having a lot of issues because she didn't have any wise advisors, and when Tyrion joined her side, that made her so much more powerful, having these wise advisors. However, I also do take Olenna's point that Daenerys also needs to know when to ignore advice, and I dare say those words of wisdom will come into play soon enough. Tyrion's plan is a really good one, but as we see at the end of the episode, it doesn't look like it's going to work out, so I dare say the time may come when Daenerys has to show strength, regardless of how much it will fuel Cersei's fire on fear-mongering of the foreign invaders, but we'll see. So we also get a sex scene between Grey Worm and Missandei. This scene went on a bit longer than I thought it should have. Honestly, didn't think it needed to be this long, but I wasn't that bothered by it. This scene has been a long time coming. On my recent rewatch, I noticed they've been building to this ever since, all the way back to season 4. So it's about bloody time, really. And many people were wondering how this would work with Grey Worm being a eunuch, but I thought the answer was pretty obvious, and yeah, I was right. And I take this as proof that Grey Worm has neither the pillar nor the stones, which is something Missandei and Daenerys were speculating about before. The other thing I'll say is this scene begins with the shot of Grey Worm sharpening his sword, something we saw in both trailers, and I and many people were wondering who the hell this was sharpening the sword. Now we know it's Grey Worm. A few people mentioned him, and I considered that a possibility, but I don't see why that shot's so important to be in both trailers. But anyway, I have a prediction to make that has nothing to do with leak spoilers. Has nothing I've read would indicate what happens to Grey Worm one way or the other. But seeing this scene with Grey Worm and Missandei having this beautiful moment as they say goodbye as Grey Worm goes off on a dangerous mission, yeah, he's going to die. And that sex scene might as well have been a death sentence. But we'll see. So next, let's go up to the north, where it was interesting seeing Jon and Sansa react to Tyrion's invitation. It's interesting that they both look at him, upon Tyrion pretty fondly. Even Sansa remembers him as a kind man, but still is cautious against answering the summons. But then again, Davos brings up the very good point about Dragonfire being an effective weapon against the Whites. So it seems like Jon was on the fence about this, but was leaning more towards not going. But then he got that letter from Samwell Tarly telling him about the dragon glass at Dragonstone, which they should have known already, but won't get into that. But I think that clinched it for him. As fire is an effective weapon against the Whites, it has no effects on the White Walkers, and Dragonglass is an effective weapon on the White Walkers, but it has no effect on the Whites, so he needs both. And when he learned Daenerys has both of what he desperately needs, as well as needing a powerful ally, well, I'm sure that clenched it for him. But when he makes this decision public, his bannermen are none too happy about it. So in last week's episode, I talked about how Jon should have conferred with Sansa beforehand about something that she may disagree with, instead of just ambushing her with it in front of everyone else. And he does the exact same thing again here, where he surprises her with the news instead of telling her beforehand. But this time he was able to shut her up pretty quick when he told her that she'd rule the North in his absence. But I do like it. It shows that Jon is listening to Sansa and does see something in her and does trust her, because Jon knows there's a possibility that he won't come back, so he trusts Sansa to rule in his stead. And I think Sansa recognized the faith that he was showing in her, which is why she nodded in approval and accepted it. And of course, he made a great point about how desperately they need this alliance with Daenerys. However, Sansa also makes a good point that Daenerys wants to be queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and the North is one of those kingdoms, as was made clear when she told Tyrion to demand Jon bend the knee to her. I actually think that Tyrion left that part out of the letter. So the main thing I wonder is, will Jon bend the knee, because the two of them need each other desperately. So it would be a shame if they can't work something out, because they're both being really stubborn and proud. But we'll see. So the scene with Jon and Littlefinger in the crypts was pretty cool, and it's pretty much exactly what I was expecting. You know, when many who saw Jon pinning Littlefinger up in the crypts assumed that this had something to do with Littlefinger revealing Jon's true parentage, but I knew that this wouldn't be the case, and instead it was Littlefinger just creeping on Sansa that set Jon off, and that made a lot of sense to me. And the neck hold was very reminiscent of what Ned did to him in season 1, so there's some dark parallels considering what Littlefinger did to Ned next. And it's funny how Littlefinger tried to talk to Jon about how he respected his father when he was the one who betrayed Ned and got him killed. So Jon is smart not to trust Littlefinger. However, by being such a blatant asshole to Littlefinger, not so smart, especially considering that he's about to leave Littlefinger at Winterfell alone with Sansa without Jon being, well, not alone, but Jon won't be there. So not the best idea to provoke him like that right before leaving. So let's go over to King's Landing, where Cersei is trying to convince the Tyrell bannermen, the most important one being Randyll Tarly, to join her against Daenerys, thus defying their own liege lord. And while Randyll's quip about being above the Lannisters by not stabbing their rivals in the back nor slitting their throats at weddings, I think he's pretty much already decided to back the Lannisters. Otherwise, he wouldn't have even gone all the way to King's Landing in the first place. At the very least, he was leaning that way, and I think Jaime offered him the reach was incentive enough for him to join, but we'll see. Also, I love the start of the scene where Cersei is, you know, twisting everything Daenerys has done and who she's allied with in order to paint her as this great evil villain. And the really funny thing is, I've gotten several comments on my past videos of commenters doing the exact same thing. In fact, those comments were so uncannily similar to Cersei's spiel here that it's just weird. I still feel like these commenters would make great propagandists for Cersei. But anyway, I'm sure it's really convincing, if not entirely accurate. So during this meeting, Randyll asked about how she plans to deal with Daenerys' dragons, and Cersei looked to Qyburn, who mentioned something about a work in progress to deal with them. Then in another scene, we see Qyburn showing Cersei this great weapon designed to kill dragons. He mentioned how Drogon was wounded in the fighting pits. Of course, he left out the part about Drogon being a lot smaller and younger back then. But I'm surprised he didn't mention history, how one of Aegon's 3 dragons, Meraxes, was killed by the Dornish, who used a similar weapon. I'm surprised he didn't mention it as an inspiration for this weapon. Now, as for the dragon weapon, dragon killer weapon itself, this most certainly is a Chekhov's gun situation, as there's absolutely no reason to introduce this weapon if it never appears in the show again. That's not to say it will definitely kill a dragon, but I do consider that a possibility. At the very least, it will come into play again somehow. However, I might tell Qyburn that shooting a stationary object is totally different than shooting a fast-flying dragon that's spitting fire at you, but we'll see. So now let's go to Old Town, where we see the Archmaester, played by Jim Broadbent, having a look at Jorah and basically saying there's nothing he can do for him. For some reason, before the season started, I was expecting this Archmaester character to be a lot more helpful than he has been. He's been decidedly extremely unhelpful and is basically just a closed-minded dick. But I suppose he's meant to represent the stubbornness of the Maesters and the way he treats Sam like an idiot, when really Sam shows more initiative and wisdom oftentimes than he does. And I have another prediction that is in no way based off of any spoilers, and that is that I think that Sam is going to get kicked out of the Citadel, either for helping Jorah or for stealing the Forbidden Books, or both. Or perhaps Sam will simply, quit. Either way, it seems pretty apparent to me that the Citadel just isn't for Sam, and Sam is just too smart and independent to be a maester, but that's just my thoughts. As for the scene where Sam was treating Jorah in secret, that was a great scene. The only thing I really have to say about that is how come Sam didn't give Jorah any milk of the poppy? If he was worried about Jorah screaming because of the pain, it seems like that would have been a much better option than rum. I mean, I think it's obvious that he took all those tools that he was using without permission, so why not steal some milk of the poppy while he's at it? Just a thought. So we get another disgusting transition from something gross to food when it cuts straight from the pussy gross scale to someone eating a pie. Okay. First time last week was funny. Second time is becoming a bit too much. And if they do it again, this will officially be overkill. But I'll give them a tentative pass this time, but I'm keeping an eye on them. Anyway, we transition to Arya meeting Hot Pie at the crossroads. Some other people predicted this, and when I heard this prediction, I thought it made a lot of sense, but I didn't personally predict it, but still wasn't surprised to see Hot Pie. It was great getting the reunion of these two. It was a bit awkward. I suppose it just goes to show how cold Arya has grown. And particularly found it interesting when Hot Pie asked her what she was up to all this time. She got this real distant look on her face, almost like she was thinking about it and she was going to tell him, but then she just changes the subject. And we get confirmation that Arya is just as ignorant as Varys and didn't know about Jon being King of the North. I suppose they should make Hot Pie the new Master of Whispers. At any rate, it was nice getting that moment where Arya told Hot Pie to take care of himself. It's almost like she was trying to remember what it was like to be a real feeling human being. And of course the news of her brother made her reconsider where she was going. You could really see the internal conflict as you see her looking at the road to King's Landing, but ultimately the thought of going home again was too much and she turns around and goes north. And the way she comes across a wolf pack led by her old direwolf Nymeria. Now, it was mentioned in the books a lot that Nymeria became the leader of a giant wolf pack who were roaming the Riverlands, but this hasn't been touched on in the show at all yet. And I dare say the wolf pack we see here is much smaller than the one mentioned in the books. Now, I obviously love this scene. I absolutely love this scene and found it very touching. It was really interesting seeing Arya reconnect with who she was as she was telling Nymeria she was going north and asked her to come along, but Nymeria doesn't, and the wolves just walk off, and Arya says, that isn't you. Now, I don't think she means that it's not Nymeria, as they made a point of showing that this wolf is like twice the size of the other wolves. So it's clearly a dire wolf, which can't be found south of the wall, let alone as far south as the Riverlands, so definitely Nymeria. What I think she meant was Nymeria's changed and isn't the same wolf she used to be. And I think this saying has double meaning for her as well, as Arya has also changed and isn't herself anymore, and perhaps this is foreshadowing she can never really go home, just like Nymeria doesn't want to go home. However, there's definitely something still of Nymeria left in her, as she does spare Arya and recognize her and doesn't attack her. So this could also hold true for Arya, as there's definitely something still Arya left in her as she decides to go north. Again, a very touching scene. So finally we come to the big finale, the big battle where Euron attacks Yara and her fleet. Now this starts with the scene of the Sand Snakes bickering with each other. It wasn't very long, and I dare say it was necessary, as we haven't seen the Sand Snakes all season. We barely saw them last season, so it's important to establish that they were there before the battle, and I think the flirting between Ellaria and Yara was a bit less necessary, but not entirely useless. So this is the first time we get a proper sea battle in Game of Thrones. And no, Battle of Blackwater doesn't count, as that's not a sea battle. They weren't out to sea. Here we see ships attack each other out in the sea, nowhere near land, and it was done extremely well. I don't care what anybody says. That scene where Euron comes down on that boarding plank thingy that just crushes the man while he's screaming like a madman was badass as fuck. And I dare say this scene has totally got me loving what they're doing with Euron. They kind of faltered with him a bit with the King's Moon, but I think they're totally making up for it now. I mean, just the whole way he behaved during the entire fight established him as a totally different kind of insane maniac than we've ever seen on this show before. Just the way he was screaming with joy as he killed Oberyn Sand and held her body up high was very Viking-esque. The actor who played him said before the season started that season 7 would make Euron even more despised than Ramsay. I don't know about all that, but I do think it establishes him as a very different kind of villain. Game of Thrones is really good at that, as even though they obviously transitioned from Joffrey to Ramsay and now Euron being the big despicable villain, each of them is distinctly different from one another. So Euron doesn't seem like a retread of Joffrey or Ramsay at all, and is a whole unique, different kind of villain that we haven't seen before, and I love it. And I'd even say his fight with the Sand Snakes was done really well. It appears they took more time to, get a Sand Snake fight right for once. And I actually felt for them when they got killed. But they did spare Arya and Tyene Sand, and I think it's fair to say that they are going to be the gifts that he intends to give Cersei, as earlier scene reminded us. Arya killed Marcellus, so Cersei would be very interested indeed in getting her hands on her. There was a lot about this battle scene that was awesome. The way that they effectively made Euron's ship appearing out of nowhere scary as fuck, and a nice combination of the fire burning on the ships all around them as Yar's forces were slaughtered. And the fight scene between Yar and Euron was really intense and believable, really well done. And Theon actually managed to hold his own in battle and managed to survive when so many others died. But when Euron was holding Yar at knife point, one might call him a coward for jumping overboard, but really it was a sensible thing to do because he looked around and saw that they lost the battle, so there's actually no way to save Yar, and if he tried, Euron likely would have just killed her. But you did see him get that like reek twitch again, so I do think this is going to be a bit of a relapse for him that will be hard to recover from, but we'll see. So my rating for Stormborn out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. A very effective episode with a lot of great character building scenes. Seeing Daenerys' new entourage interact and get established was really fascinating to watch, as well as seeing Cersei try to gain even more allies. And the scene with Arya and her direwolf, really touching, and this is all topped off by a short but very effective, intense sea battle that shows Euron as the new badass on the show, and I love to hate him already. So that's it for my review of Stormborn. Be sure to check out my discussion with Apkin Tomko in a couple of days. That will be over on his channel, where we'll be joined by the Geeksiders to talk all about this episode. I'll put a link to the video in the description below. Also be sure to check back here later in the week as I do my further analysis video, where I'll get a bit more into spoiler territory and go over some further thoughts on the episode and reaction to it. Also be sure to check out my channel for many other videos on other shows like Star Trek, Dark Matter, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.